For as long as I could remember, I believed in love built on sacrifice. My relationship with Daniel began with the kind of passion that makes you think anything is possible. We met in college, both of us young, ambitious, and full of dreams. Daniel wanted to start his own tech company, and I wanted to support him in every way I could. In those early days, I was his rock. I worked extra shifts at the local diner to pay for groceries and rent while he poured every waking moment into developing his idea. We lived in a tiny apartment with leaky faucets and a perpetually broken heater, but we were happy, or at least I thought we were. Daniel's enthusiasm was infectious. He'd come home late, eyes alight with excitement as he talked about his progress, his plans, and his vision for the future. I'd sit beside him on our threadbare couch, listening intently, cheering him on. "You're going to change the world," I'd tell him, meaning every word. As his dreams grew, so did my sacrifices. I turned down a promotion at my job because it would have meant longer hours and less time to support Daniel. When he suggested we move to a bigger city for better networking opportunities, I didn't hesitate to pack up my life and follow him. I left behind my family, my friends, and the small comforts of home, all for the promise of a shared future. For years, I juggled multiple jobs to keep us afloat while Daniel worked on his startup. I took care of the household, managed the bills, and made sure he had everything he needed to focus on his goals. I cooked late-night meals, stayed up with him during his all-nighters, and became his sounding board for every idea and challenge he faced. "None of this would be possible without you," he'd say, his voice filled with gratitude as he kissed my forehead. "You're my everything, Emma." Those words sustained me during the toughest moments. Whenever I felt overwhelmed or doubted my choices, I reminded myself that we were a team, that his success would be our success. Eventually, Daniel's hard work began to pay off. His startup gained traction, attracting investors and attention from the tech community. The late nights turned into business meetings, and our modest apartment was replaced by a sleek condo in the heart of the city. I was proud of him, proud of us. Every sacrifice I had made felt worth it as I watched him stand on stage at a tech conference, accepting an award for innovation. "I couldn't have done this without my incredible wife," he said during his speech, looking out at the crowd and then at me. My heart swelled with pride, convinced that we were on the right path. But even in those moments of triumph, there were subtle signs that I chose to ignore. Daniel's phone buzzed constantly with emails and messages, his attention often divided during our conversations. The romantic dinners we used to enjoy became hurried meals in front of his laptop. He'd reassure me that it was just the demands of success, that things would settle down soon. "Just a little longer," he'd say, squeezing my hand. "We're almost there." And I believed him. I had to. Looking back, I realize now that the cracks were already forming in our foundation. But at the time I couldn't see it. I was too focused on holding everything together, too invested in the life we had built to question whether I was truly happy. I poured every ounce of myself into supporting Daniel, believing that my sacrifices were a testament to my love and commitment. I didn't realize that I was slowly losing pieces of myself in the process. Little did I know the life I had worked so hard to build was about to unravel in ways I could never have imagined. Daniel's success became a whirlwind, growing faster than either of us had anticipated. His startup transformed from a small operation into a thriving enterprise, complete with a sprawling office, dozens of employees, and media coverage that painted him as a visionary entrepreneur. Investors flocked to him, eager to be part of his journey, and his name began appearing on lists of the industry's top innovators. I couldn't have been prouder. Watching Daniel achieve everything he had dreamed of felt like watching the culmination of years of hard work, both his and mine. But as his star rose higher, the cracks in our relationship deepened, and I started to feel like a supporting character in a story I had once believed we were writing together. The first signs were subtle. Daniel began spending more time at the office, sometimes staying overnight to finalize deals or oversee projects. When I called him to ask when he'd be home, his responses became increasingly vague. "Late," he'd say, his voice distracted. "Don't wait up." At first, I tried to be understanding. His success demanded a lot of him, and I didn't want to seem unsupportive. I continued to manage the household, handling everything from paying bills to planning family gatherings. But it was hard not to notice how often Daniel's attention was elsewhere, even when he was physically present. We started going to glamorous events, industry galas, investor dinners, and award ceremonies. I would stand by his side in a carefully chosen dress, smiling for photos and listening as he charmed the room. People would compliment us, calling us a power couple, and I'd nod politely, ignoring the growing sense of isolation. One night, at a particularly lavish gala, I noticed something that made my stomach churn. As Daniel chatted with a group of executives, I saw how effortlessly he laughed and smiled, his charm magnetic. But when he turned to me, his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Everything okay?" I asked later that evening as we drove home. "Of course," he replied, glancing at his phone. "Why wouldn't it be? You just seem distant lately," I said cautiously. Daniel sighed, putting his phone down. "Emma, you know how demanding this is. I'm doing all of this for us. Can't you just trust me?" His words stung and I felt a lump form in my throat. "I do trust you," I said quietly. "I just miss you." "I'm right here," he said, reaching for my hand. But the gesture felt hollow and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. The distance grew wider as Daniel's success continued to soar. He started traveling frequently, jetting off to meetings in other cities and countries. Our once shared dreams of starting a family and building a life together were pushed aside, replaced by his relentless pursuit of success. I tried to talk to him about it one evening as we sat down for a rare dinner together. "Do you still want the things we talked about?" I asked hesitantly. "A family, a home where we can settle down." Daniel looked at me as if I had asked him to abandon everything he had worked for. "Emma, this isn't the right time," he said, his tone impatient. "I thought you understood that." "I do," I said, my voice trembling. "But it feels like you're building a life I'm not a part of anymore." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "This is temporary. Once things stabilize, we'll have all the time in the world for those things. You just need to be patient." I nodded, swallowing my disappointment. But deep down I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling that his promises were just empty words. One day as I tidied the house, I stumbled upon something that confirmed my fears. Hidden among a pile of papers on Daniel's desk was a draft of a business contract. My eyes scanned the pages and my heart sank when I saw that it mentioned relocating his company to another city, one far from where we lived. He hadn't said a word to me about it. When he came home that evening, I confronted him. "Were you planning to tell me about the move?" I asked, holding up the contract. Daniel froze, his expression a mix of guilt and annoyance. "I was going to tell you when the details were finalized," he said defensively. "When?" I demanded. "After you signed the papers? After you moved without me?" "Emma, don't be dramatic," he said, his tone sharp. "This is a huge opportunity. I didn't want to stress you out until I knew for sure." I stared at him, feeling the weight of every sacrifice I had made for him. "I gave up everything for you, Daniel," I said, my voice breaking. "And now you're making decisions that affect both of us without even consulting me?" "This is my career," he said, his voice rising. "You knew what you were signing up for when you decided to support me." His words cut deeper than I could have imagined. It wasn't just the move. It was the realization that Daniel no longer saw me as his partner. I was just someone who made his life easier, someone who had become an afterthought in his pursuit of success. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling and wondering how we had gotten to this point. The man I had fallen in love with, the man who had once promised me the world, felt like a stranger. And for the first time, I began to question whether the life I had sacrificed so much for was worth holding on to. Little did I know the worst was yet to come. The days following our argument were filled with a heavy silence. Daniel and I drifted further apart, our conversations reduced to superficial exchanges about schedules and logistics. He seemed more consumed by his work than ever, and I felt like an afterthought in his life. I tried to convince myself that this was just a rough patch, that all relationships had their challenges. But deep down I knew something was wrong. The man who had once shared his dreams and fears with me now felt like a stranger. One evening as I prepared dinner, I realized that Daniel hadn't texted or called to say he'd be late. Again. I sat alone at the table, staring at the empty chair across from me, the food on my plate growing cold. When he finally walked through the door hours later, his shirt rumpled and his tie loosened, I tried to mask my frustration. "Long day?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Yeah," he said, barely glancing at me as he poured himself a glass of water. "Meetings ran over." "I wish you'd let me know," I said softly. He sighed, setting the glass down with more force than necessary. "Emma, I don't have time to check in every hour. You know how demanding this job is." "I'm not asking for every hour," I replied, my voice trembling. Just a simple text to let me know you're okay. His dismissive shrug cut through me like a knife. I'll try, he said, his tone making it clear that he wouldn't. As the weeks went on, Daniel's absences became more frequent. He started traveling for work without discussing it with me beforehand, leaving me to find out through vague messages or notes he left on the counter. One weekend he was supposed to return from a business trip in time for our anniversary. I had planned a quiet dinner at home, hoping to reconnect and remind ourselves of why we had fallen in love in the first place. But as the hours ticked by, it became clear that he wasn't coming. When I finally called him, he answered on the second ring, his voice filled with exhaustion. Emma, I'm sorry. I got caught up in meetings and my flight was delayed. You could have told me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't want to stress you out, he said dismissively. We'll celebrate another time, okay? Sure, I replied, hanging up before he could hear the tears in my voice. The neglect wasn't just emotional, it became physical too. Daniel stopped noticing the little things he used to love about me. He no longer commented on the way I styled my hair or the dresses I wore, and our intimate moments became rare and mechanical. I started to feel invisible, as though I were fading into the background of his life. Even when we were in the same room, he was miles away, his attention fixed on his phone or laptop. One night, as he worked late in his home office, I stood in the doorway watching him. His brow was furrowed in concentration, his fingers flying across the keyboard. For a moment, I considered walking in, asking him to take a break to spend some time with me. But I knew what his answer would be. Instead, I turned and walked back to the bedroom, tears streaming down my face as I lay alone in the bed we had once shared. The final straw came when I discovered he had canceled a weekend getaway we had planned months in advance. I had been looking forward to it, hoping it would give us a chance to reconnect. But when I mentioned it a week before, Daniel looked at me blankly. Oh, he said, his tone indifferent. I forgot to tell you I can't go. There's a conference I need to attend. You forgot to tell me? I repeated, incredulous. Emma, it's not a big deal, he said, brushing me off. We can reschedule. It is a big deal, Daniel, I said, my voice breaking. This was supposed to be our time, just the two of us. Don't you care about that anymore? He sighed, his expression one of exasperation. I don't have time for this right now. Those words echoed in my mind long after he left the room. I started to feel like a ghost in my own life, wandering through the motions of a marriage that no longer felt real. I had sacrificed so much for Daniel, believing that our love was worth it. But now I wasn't sure if he even saw me anymore, or if he ever truly had. The pain of his neglect cut deeper than any argument or disagreement we had ever had. It wasn't just that he was absent, it was that he didn't seem to care. Little did I know the worst was yet to come. The moment that shattered the fragile thread holding our marriage together came unexpectedly, like a storm that I hadn't seen brewing. It wasn't one of Daniel's canceled plans or the long nights he spent away from home. It was something far more personal, something that left me questioning every choice I had made. One ordinary afternoon, I felt a sudden, sharp pain in my side while carrying groceries up the stairs. At first, I brushed it off as nothing more than exhaustion. But as the hours passed, the pain intensified, radiating through my abdomen and leaving me barely able to stand. I called Daniel, my voice shaky as I tried to explain what was happening. I think I need to go to the hospital, I said, clutching the edge of the counter to steady myself. His response was a dagger to my heart. Emma, I'm in the middle of a meeting. Can't you call someone else? Daniel, I don't think I can wait, I said, my voice breaking. Please, I need you. There was a pause and then he sighed. I'll see if I can wrap things up, but it might be a while. By the time I hung up, tears were streaming down my face. I realized that I couldn't count on him, not even in a moment like this. I ended up calling an ambulance. The paramedics were kind, their concerned expressions a sharp contrast to Daniel's indifference. At the hospital, the doctors discovered that I had a ruptured ovarian cyst, a serious condition that required immediate attention. As I lay in the sterile hospital bed, the beeping of monitors filling the room, I felt a wave of loneliness wash over me. I had always imagined that if I ever found myself in a situation like this, Daniel would be by my side, holding my hand and reassuring me that everything would be okay. But he wasn't there. Daniel finally arrived hours later, his tie still neatly knotted and his phone in hand. How are you feeling? He asked, his tone detached as he glanced at his screen. I stared at him, unable to believe how casually he was treating this. I was scared, Daniel, I said, my voice trembling. I thought something might be seriously wrong, and you couldn't even come when I needed you. I'm here now, he said defensively. Now? I repeated, anger bubbling to the surface. After the ambulance, after the tests, after the doctor explained what happened? Where were you when I was alone and terrified? He sighed, looking exasperated. Emma, I told you I was in a meeting. I can't just drop everything every time something comes up. Every time something comes up? I said, my voice rising. I'm your wife, Daniel. Or have you forgotten that? His silence spoke volumes. That night, as I lay awake in the hospital bed, I made a decision that had been building inside me for months. I couldn't keep living like this, being treated as an afterthought in the life I had sacrificed so much to build. When I was discharged the next day, Daniel picked me up, his demeanor unchanged. The car ride home was silent, tension hanging thick in the air. As we pulled into the driveway, I turned to him, my heart pounding. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Emma, I'm exhausted, he replied, stepping out of the car. Can it wait? No, it can't, I said firmly, following him into the house. He turned to face me, his expression one of frustration. What is it? I can't do this anymore, I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. I can't keep sacrificing myself for someone who doesn't see me, who doesn't care enough to show up when it matters. Daniel stared at me, stunned. What are you saying? I'm saying that I deserve better, I replied, my voice breaking. I deserve to be with someone who values me, who sees me as more than just an accessory to their success. For the first time, I saw a flicker of emotion in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or fear. But it was too little too late. Emma, don't do this, he said, stepping closer. We've been through so much together. Exactly, I said, tears streaming down my face. I've given you everything, Daniel. And when I needed you most, you weren't there. That's not a marriage. That's not love. He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand to stop him. I'm done, I said, my voice firm. I don't know what that means yet, but I know I can't keep living like this. That night, I slept in the guest room, the weight of my decision pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years I felt a glimmer of hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find my way back to myself. Little did I know this was only the beginning of a journey that would change everything. The morning after I told Daniel I was done, the air in the house felt heavy with unspoken words. I could hear him moving around in the kitchen, the clinking of coffee mugs and the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Part of me expected him to come to the guest room and try to make things right, to acknowledge the pain he had caused and fight for what we had left. But he didn't. Instead, when I finally stepped into the kitchen, he looked up briefly, muttered a quiet, "Morning," and returned to scrolling through his phone. It was as if the weight of my words the night before hadn't even registered. For the next few days we lived like strangers under the same roof. I spent most of my time in the guest room, using the solitude to process everything that had happened. The more I reflected on our relationship, the more I realized how much I had lost myself in the years we were together. I thought about all the dreams I had put on hold, the opportunities one had passed up, and the friends I had drifted away from because I was too busy supporting Daniel. I thought about the way I had diminished my own needs and desires, convincing myself that his success would be enough for both of us. But it wasn't. One evening, as I sorted through a box of old photos, I came across a picture of us from the early days of our relationship. We were standing in front of the tiny apartment we had first shared, both of us grinning like fools. My hair was windswept, his shirt was slightly wrinkled, and we looked completely, blissfully happy. I stared at the photo, tears welling in my eyes. I couldn't remember the last time we had looked at each other like that. Somewhere along the way we had lost what made us special. Or maybe I had just been blind to the fact that Daniel's ambitions had always come first. I placed the photo back in the box and wiped my eyes. It was time to let go, not just of the relationship, but of the guilt and self-blame I had been carrying for so long. The next day I made a decision: I would leave. I didn't know where I would go or what I would do, but I couldn't stay in a place that constantly reminded me of everything I had sacrificed and lost. When Daniel came home that evening, I told him my plan. I'm moving out, I said, my voice steady. I've already started looking for a new place. He stared at me, his expression unreadable. Emma, is this really necessary? Yes, I said firmly. I need space to figure out who I am and what I want. And I can't do that here. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I never wanted it to come to this. Neither did I said softly. But here we are. Moving out was both terrifying and liberating. I found a small apartment on the other side of town, a modest space with creaky floors and outdated appliances, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of ownership over my life, a chance to rebuild on my own terms. The first few nights were the hardest. The quiet felt deafening, and I often found myself lying awake, replaying the events that had led me to this point. I wondered if I had made the right choice, if I could have done something differently to save our marriage. But as the days turned into weeks, I started to feel lighter. I began filling my time with things that brought me joy: reading, painting, taking long walks in the park. I reconnected with old friends, sharing laughs and memories that reminded me of who I had been before Daniel. One day, while unpacking a box of books, I stumbled upon a journal I had kept in college. Flipping through its pages, I was struck by the dreams and goals I had once had, dreams that had nothing to do with Daniel or his success. I had wanted to write, to create stories that inspired and connected people. Somewhere along the way, I had buried that dream, telling myself it wasn't practical or important. But now, with a blank page in front of me, I felt a spark of possibility. I picked up a pen and began to write. As I immersed myself in writing, I discovered a sense of purpose and fulfillment that I hadn't felt in years. My stories were raw and personal, reflecting the pain, resilience, and hope that had defined my journey. I shared one of them on a small blog, not expecting much, but to my surprise it resonated with readers. Messages began pouring in from people who saw themselves in my words, who thanked me for sharing my story and reminded me that I wasn't alone. It was a turning point, a reminder that my voice mattered, and that I had the power to shape my own future. While I wasn't fully healed, I was starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I had survived the heartbreak, the betrayal, and the loss of a relationship I once thought would last forever. And now I was learning how to thrive one step at a time. Little did I know my journey was far from over. Moving into my own apartment marked the beginning of a transformative journey, but rebuilding myself was far more challenging than I had anticipated. For years I had defined myself by my role in Daniel's life, as his supporter, his cheerleader, his partner. Now I was forced to confront a daunting question. Who was I without him? In the early days, the silence was the hardest part. The absence of Daniel's presence, his voice, his routines, it all left a void that felt impossible to fill. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to see the silence as an opportunity, a blank canvas on which I could rediscover myself. The first thing I did was establish a new routine. Each morning, I made it a point to get out of bed, no matter how tempting it was to linger under the covers. I'd brew a cup of coffee, sit by the window, and write in my journal. At first, my entries were filled with anger and sadness, raw emotions that I had suppressed for far too long. But over time, my words began to shift, reflecting moments of gratitude and hope. One day, I wrote a list of things I wanted to do, things I had put off or forgotten in the chaos of my marriage. At the top of the list was painting. When I was younger, painting had been my escape, a way to express emotions I couldn't put into words. But as life got busier, I had pushed it aside, telling myself I didn't have time. Now I realized I needed it more than ever. I dug out an old set of paints and brushes, their colors still vibrant despite years of neglect. Setting up a small corner in my apartment, I began to paint again. At first, my strokes were hesitant, unsure. But as I lost myself in the process, I felt a sense of freedom that I hadn't experienced in years. My first painting was simple, a landscape of rolling hills and a golden sunset. But to me, it was a masterpiece, a symbol of my first step toward reclaiming my identity. As I painted, I began to reconnect with parts of myself that I had forgotten. I rediscovered my love for cooking, experimenting with new recipes and filling my tiny kitchen with the comforting aroma of homemade meals. I started reading books I had always meant to read, losing myself in their pages late into the night. Each small act of self-care felt like a victory, a reminder that I was capable of creating a life that brought me joy. One of the most unexpected parts of my journey was reconnecting with old friends. When I reached out to them, unsure of how they would react after years of distance, I was met with nothing but warmth and understanding. "Emma, we've missed you," Clara said during our first coffee date, her smile lighting up the room. "I've missed you too," I admitted, tears threatening to spill. Our conversations were a lifeline, filled with laughter and the kind of honesty that only old friends can provide. Clara reminded me of who I had been before Daniel, of the vibrant, ambitious woman who had once dreamed of conquering the world. As I rebuilt my life, I also began to explore new opportunities. Inspired by my paintings, I started sharing my work on social media. To my surprise, people loved it. Comments and messages poured in, praising the emotion and beauty in my art. "You have a gift," one message read. "Thank you for sharing it with the world." Encouraged by the response, I took a leap of faith and applied for a local art fair. When I received the acceptance email, I couldn't believe it. For the first time, I felt like I was doing something for myself. Something that was entirely mine. With each passing day, I grew stronger. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. My journey wasn't linear. There were still moments of doubt and sadness, nights when the loneliness felt overwhelming. But those moments no longer defined me. I began to see my pain as a source of strength, a reminder that I had the power to endure and overcome. And as I looked around at the life I was building, filled with art, friendship, and purpose, I realized that I was becoming the person I was always meant to be. Life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. Just as I was starting to feel settled in my new routine, an opportunity came along that I never could have anticipated. It started with a phone call from Clara, who had been one of my biggest cheerleaders since I began rebuilding my life. "Emma, you're not going to believe this," she said, her voice brimming with excitement. "I was talking to a friend of mine who works at an art gallery, and she's hosting a showcase for local artists. I showed her some of your work and she's interested in featuring you." I nearly dropped the phone. "Wait, what?" "She loves your paintings," Clara said. "She thinks your story and your art would resonate with people." I told her I'd ask if you were interested. I hesitated, a mix of excitement and fear coursing through me. "I don't know, Clara. I've only just started sharing my work. What if I'm not ready?" "You are ready," she said firmly. "You've poured your heart into your art and people need to see it. Trust me." After much encouragement from Clara, I decided to take the leap. I met with the gallery curator, a warm and enthusiastic woman named Sophia, who immediately put me at ease. "Your work is beautiful, Emma," she said as we sat in her office, surrounded by paintings and sculptures. "It's raw and emotional in a way that feels deeply personal. I think it will really connect with people." Her words filled me with a sense of validation I hadn't realized I was craving. For so long, I had doubted my abilities, questioning whether my art was good enough to share with the world. But hearing her praise gave me the confidence to move forward. Preparing for the showcase was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. I spent countless hours in my little studio, fine-tuning each piece and pouring my emotions onto the canvas. My paintings reflected the journey I had been on. The pain of betrayal, the loneliness of starting over, and the strength I had found within myself. One evening, as I worked on a particularly emotional piece, Clara stopped by with a bottle of wine and a wide smile. "How's it going?" she asked, handing me a glass. "It's overwhelming," I admitted, taking a sip. "But in a good way." She looked around at the paintings, her eyes glistening with admiration. "Emma, this is incredible. I hope you know how proud I am of you." Her words brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. The night of the showcase arrived and I was a bundle of nerves. The gallery was filled with people, art enthusiasts, friends, and strangers alike. As I walked through the space, I overheard snippets of conversations about my work. "This one is so powerful," a woman said, gesturing to a painting of a woman standing alone on a stormy cliff. "You can feel the emotion pouring out of it." "I love how personal these pieces are," another person commented. "It's like you're getting a glimpse into the artist's soul." Hearing those words filled me with a sense of pride and accomplishment. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, not as someone's wife or someone who had been betrayed, but as an artist with a voice of her own. Toward the end of the evening, Sophia approached me with a beaming smile. "Emma, your work has been the highlight of the showcase. Several people have expressed interest in purchasing your pieces." I stared at her, stunned. "Really? Really," she said, her eyes sparkling. "You have a gift and people are drawn to it." Her words felt like a turning point, a moment that marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. As I left the gallery that night, I couldn't stop smiling. The opportunity to share my art had reminded me of my own resilience, my ability to create beauty out of pain. It was a reminder that my story wasn't over, that I was capable of achieving things I had once thought impossible. As the gallery showcase continued to bring attention to my artwork, I found myself surrounded by new opportunities and, unexpectedly, new people. Among them was Liam, a fellow artist whose work was also featured in the exhibition. His paintings were vibrant and full of life, with bold strokes and vivid colors that seemed to leap off the canvas. We were introduced at the gallery's closing reception, where he approached me with an easy smile. "You must be Emma," he said, extending a hand. "I've been hearing a lot about you, and your incredible work." I shook his hand, smiling shyly. "Thank you. Your paintings are amazing too. The colors are so striking." "Thanks," he said, his hazel eyes warm. "But I have to say there's something about your pieces that really hit me. They're raw and honest in a way that's hard to find." His compliment caught me off guard and I felt a blush rise to my cheeks. "That means a lot," I said softly. Liam and I struck up an easy conversation that evening, finding common ground in our shared love for art. Unlike the people I had encountered during Daniel's rise to success, Liam wasn't interested in pretenses or appearances. He was genuine, curious, and refreshingly down-to-earth. Over the next few weeks, we began meeting for coffee or lunch, our conversations ranging from art and inspiration to life and the challenges we'd faced. Liam had his own story of heartbreak, an engagement that had ended abruptly when his fiancée decided she wasn't ready for marriage. "It broke me for a while," he admitted one afternoon as we sat in a cozy cafe. "But it also taught me a lot about myself. Sometimes the things we think we can't survive end up making us stronger." His words resonated deeply with me. "I know what you mean," I said, stirring my tea. "There were moments when I thought I'd never get through everything with Daniel. But now I can see how it's shaped me into who I am today." Liam nodded, his hazel eyes thoughtful. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Emma. That strength shows in everything you do, your art, your presence, the way you carry yourself." His compliment lingered with me long after our conversation ended, filling me with a sense of validation I hadn't realized I needed. One day, Liam invited me to visit his studio, a sunlit space filled with canvases, brushes, and the faint smell of turpentine. "This is where the magic happens," he said with a grin, showing me around. I was struck by the energy of his work, the boldness of his colors, the confidence in his strokes. "Your paintings are incredible," I said, running my fingers lightly over the edge of a canvas. "Coming from you, that means a lot," he replied. As we spent the afternoon painting side by side, I felt a sense of ease that I hadn't experienced in years. Liam didn't try to fix me or push me into anything I wasn't ready for. He simply listened, encouraged, and made me laugh when I needed it most. Our friendship became a source of strength and comfort, a reminder that I didn't have to navigate my journey alone. Liam wasn't trying to replace what I had lost or fill the void left by Daniel. He was simply there, offering support and understanding without expectations. One evening, as we walked along the river after dinner, he turned to me with a smile. "You know, Emma, you're not just an amazing artist. You're an amazing person. And anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve to be in your life." His words brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you, Liam," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't think I've ever had someone believe in me the way you do." "I'm just telling you the truth," he said, his smile soft and genuine. As my friendship with Liam deepened, so did my confidence in myself. His unwavering support reminded me that I was capable of standing on my own 2 feet, of pursuing my dreams without fear. And while I wasn't ready to think about a new relationship, I couldn't deny the warmth that blossomed whenever Liam was around. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen, not as someone's wife or someone who had been betrayed, but as myself. And that feeling was worth more than I could put into words. The months following the gallery showcase were transformative in ways I could never have imagined. My artwork gained more recognition, with several pieces selling to private collectors and a few inquiries about commissioned work. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building something that was entirely my own, something that wasn't tied to anyone else's dreams or expectations. I poured myself into my art, spending hours in my small studio creating pieces that reflected not only my journey but also the emotions I had suppressed for so long. Each stroke of the brush felt cathartic, a way to release the pain, anger, and sadness that had once consumed me. Opportunities began to flow my way in a way that felt almost surreal. A local arts organization reached out, asking if I'd be interested in teaching a weekend workshop for aspiring artists. At first I hesitated, unsure if I was qualified to teach. But Clara, ever the supportive friend, nudged me forward. "Emma, you have so much to offer," she said over coffee one morning. "Your story, your talent. It's inspiring. People will want to learn from you." With her encouragement, I accepted the offer. Standing in front of a group of eager students on that first day, I felt a mix of nerves and excitement. But as I began to share my techniques and the stories behind my work, I saw how engaged they were, how much they connected with what I had to say. By the end of the workshop, I was buzzing with energy. One of the participants approached me afterward, a young woman with a shy smile. "Thank you for today," she said. "Your story really resonated with me. It's inspiring to see someone turn something painful into something beautiful." Her words stayed with me long after the workshop ended, a reminder of the impact my journey could have on others. Beyond my professional growth, my personal life was also flourishing. My friendships with Clara and Liam continued to deepen, providing a strong support system that kept me grounded. Clara was my sounding board, always ready with advice or a pep talk when I needed it. And Liam was quickly becoming one of the most important people in my life. We spent countless afternoons together, painting side by side or exploring new corners of the city. He had a way of making me laugh, of making me feel at ease even on my toughest days. His presence was a constant reminder that I didn't have to face life's challenges alone. One evening, as we sat on a bench overlooking the city skyline, Liam turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You've come so far, Emma," he said. "I hope you see that." I smiled, gazing out at the twinkling lights. "I do," I said softly. "But I couldn't have done it without people like you and Clara. You've both been my rock through all of this." Liam shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "You give us too much credit. The strength you've shown, that's all you." His words filled me with a sense of pride and gratitude. I had spent so long doubting myself, questioning my worth, but Liam's unwavering belief in me reminded me of how far I had come. As my confidence grew, so did my willingness to embrace new experiences. I started saying yes to things I would have once shied away from, joining a local hiking group, attending community events, and even traveling to a nearby city to visit an art exhibit I had always admired. Each new experience felt like a step toward reclaiming my independence, toward building a life that was vibrant and fulfilling. One of the most profound moments came when I received an invitation to participate in a national art competition. The stakes were high and the competition was fierce, but I knew I couldn't let fear hold me back. I worked tirelessly on my submission, pouring every ounce of emotion and creativity into the piece. When the day of the competition arrived, I felt a mix of nerves and excitement as I stood in the gallery, surrounded by some of the most talented artists in the country. To my amazement, my piece received an honorable mention. While I didn't win, the recognition felt like a victory, a testament to how far I had come since the days when I doubted my abilities. My flourishing life wasn't without its challenges. There were still moments when memories of Daniel crept in, uninvited and unwelcome. But instead of letting those memories consume me, I used them as fuel, to paint, to write, to push forward. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. My life was no longer defined by heartbreak or betrayal. It was defined by the strength and resilience I had found within myself. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Just as I began to settle into the peace and joy of my new life, the past came knocking, literally. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, and I had just finished a painting that I planned to submit to another gallery show. The warm sunlight streaming through my studio windows made everything feel perfect. Until the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I froze. There he was, Daniel, standing on my doorstep with an apologetic expression and a bouquet of flowers that felt more like an afterthought than a gesture of sincerity. "Emma," he said softly, his blue eyes searching mine. "Can we talk?" My first instinct was to slam the door, to protect the sanctuary I had built for myself. But curiosity and years of shared history held me in place. I stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in. He sat on my couch, looking around at the space I had made my own. His gaze lingered on the paintings lining the walls, the sketches strewn across the table. "You've done well for yourself," he said, his tone almost wistful. "I have," I replied, sitting across from him, my arms crossed. "What are you doing here, Daniel?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About us, about everything that happened. And I prompted, my voice steady. I made a mistake, he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. I was selfish and I took you for granted. I didn't realize what I had until I lost you. His words were everything I had once longed to hear. But now they felt hollow. Daniel, do you even understand what you put me through? I asked, my voice tinged with both sadness and anger. The neglect, the betrayal, the way you abandoned me when I needed you the most? I know, he said quickly. I know I failed you, Emma. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I came here to say I'm sorry and to ask if there's any way we can start over. His request hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. I thought about the years I had spent supporting him, the sacrifices I had made, and the pain I had endured when he left. I thought about the nights I had cried myself to sleep, wondering if I would ever feel whole again. And then I thought about the life I had built since, one filled with purpose, passion, and people who truly cared about me. Daniel, I began, my voice calm but firm, I'm glad you're taking responsibility for your actions. But your apology doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't change the fact that you broke my trust, or that I've spent the last year rebuilding my life without you. He looked down at his hands, his expression one of regret. I know I don't deserve a second chance, he said quietly. But I still love you, Emma. His words might have undone me once, but now they felt like an echo of a life I no longer wanted. Love isn't enough, Daniel, I said, standing up. It wasn't enough when we were married and it's not enough now. I've moved on, and I'm not willing to jeopardize the happiness I've found to go back to something that hurt me so deeply. He nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping as he stood to leave. I understand, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you, Emma. You've become everything I always knew you could be. I didn't respond, letting his words settle in the silence as I walked him to the door. As he stepped outside, the autumn wind tousling his hair, I felt a strange sense of closure. Watching him walk away for the second time, I realized something important. His absence no longer left a void. Instead, it had created space for me to grow into the person I was always meant to be. That evening, I called Clara to share what had happened. He came back, she exclaimed, disbelief in her voice. He did, I said. But it's over. I'm sure of it. She laughed softly. You've come a long way, Emma. I hope you're proud of yourself. I am, I said, smiling as I gazed at the painting I had finished earlier. I really am. The experience with Daniel reaffirmed what I already knew. My happiness didn't depend on him, or anyone else. It was something I had built for myself through resilience, hard work, and a refusal to let my past define me. The days following Daniel's unexpected visit felt like a whirlwind of emotions. While I was proud of how I had handled the situation, his presence stirred memories I had worked so hard to let go of. But instead of letting those feelings consume me, I channeled them into my art, turning the experience into a vivid painting of closure and renewal. One afternoon, as I stared at the finished piece, a wave of clarity washed over me. For the first time, I felt free, not just from Daniel but from the version of myself that had been defined by my sacrifices and his neglect. I wasn't that woman anymore. I had grown, flourished, and reclaimed my identity. Liam was one of the first people I shared the painting with. He visited my studio that evening, his hazel eyes lighting up as he took in the piece. Emma, this is incredible, he said, stepping closer to examine the bold strokes and vibrant colors. It's like you've captured everything you've been through and turned it into something beautiful. That's what I was hoping for, I said, smiling. It's my way of letting go. He turned to me, his expression serious. You've let go of the past, Emma, but you've also built something extraordinary in its place. I hope you realize how far you've come. I do, I said softly. And I couldn't have done it without the support of people like you and Clara. You give us too much credit, Liam said with a grin. This has always been your journey, Emma. We're just lucky to be part of it. The closure with Daniel gave me the strength to set firmer boundaries in my life. I realized that I didn't owe anyone an explanation for prioritizing my happiness, not even those who had once played significant roles in my story. When Daniel reached out a few weeks later, asking if we could meet for coffee just to catch up, I politely declined. I appreciate the gesture, but I don't think it's a good idea, I texted. I've moved on and I hope you can too. His reply was brief, I understand. Wishing you the best. And with that, the chapter closed completely. With Daniel out of the picture, I turned my focus fully to my art and the relationships that mattered most. My bond with Liam continued to deepen, and I found myself looking forward to our time together more than I cared to admit. One evening, as we sat on a blanket under the stars, sharing a bottle of wine and laughing about something ridiculous, Liam's laughter faded, replaced by a thoughtful expression. "Emma," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "I've been wanting to tell you something." I looked at him, my heart pounding in anticipation. "What is it?" He hesitated for a moment, then met my gaze. "I care about you. More than just as a friend. And I know you've been through a lot, but I need you to know how I feel." His words took my breath away. For so long, I had been hesitant to let anyone get too close, afraid of being hurt again. But with Liam it was different. He had been there for me through some of my darkest moments, offering support without expectation, and his presence had become a source of comfort and joy. "I care about you too," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. His smile was slow and genuine, and in that moment I felt a warmth I hadn't experienced in years. A feeling of being seen, valued, and loved for exactly who I was. As Liam and I navigated the beginnings of a relationship, I realized that love didn't have to be about sacrifice or loss. It could be about growth, partnership, and mutual respect. With Liam, I didn't feel like I had to give up pieces of myself to make things work. Instead, I felt like I was finally able to be my whole, authentic self. One afternoon, as we walked through the park hand in hand, Liam turned to me with a grin. "You know, Emma, I always knew you'd find your way. I just feel lucky to be part of the journey." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "I feel lucky too." Standing my ground with Daniel had been one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but it had also been one of the most liberating. It taught me that my worth wasn't tied to anyone else's validation, and that I had the power to create a life that was entirely my own. As I looked around at the life I had built, filled with love, art, and endless possibilities, I felt a sense of gratitude for every step of the journey, even the painful ones. The journey that had started in heartbreak and despair had finally brought me to a place of peace and fulfillment. My life, once defined by sacrifice and longing, was now a reflection of resilience and self-discovery. I had created a life I could truly call my own, and for the first time in years I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The months following my decision to move on from Daniel were filled with milestones, each one a testament to how far I had come. My art career continued to flourish, with galleries reaching out to feature my work and commissions pouring in from people who connected with the emotion in my pieces. One of the most meaningful moments came when I was invited to give a talk at a prestigious art event. Standing on stage, sharing my story with a room full of aspiring artists, I felt a sense of purpose that went beyond words. "My journey wasn't easy," I said, my voice steady as I looked out at the audience. "But it taught me that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to create something beautiful." Art gave me a way to process my pain, to find my voice, and to rediscover who I am. And I hope it can do the same for you. The applause that followed was overwhelming, but it wasn't the recognition that mattered most. It was the knowledge that my story had resonated with others, that I had turned my pain into something meaningful. On a more personal level, my relationship with Liam had grown into something I hadn't dared to hope for. He was patient and understanding, never pushing me beyond what I was ready for but always encouraging me to dream bigger. One evening, as we walked along the beach, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Liam turned to me with a soft smile. "Emma," he said, his voice filled with warmth, "I've watched you grow into the most incredible version of yourself. And I want to be part of whatever comes next if you'll let me." Tears filled my eyes as I looked at him, the man who had stood by me through every high and low. "I want that too," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. He reached for my hand, and in that moment, I knew that this was the kind of love I had always deserved. One built on trust, mutual respect, and a deep understanding of who we were as individuals. As I stood in my studio one evening, reflecting on everything that had led me to this point, I realized how far I had come from the woman who had once been consumed by heartbreak. I had turned my pain into strength, my sacrifices into lessons, and my losses into opportunities for growth. Looking back, I didn't regret the journey. Every challenge, every tear, every sleepless night had brought me to this moment. A moment where I could stand tall and proud, knowing that I had built a life that was truly mine. The final chapter of my story wasn't one of closure, but of new beginnings. It was about embracing the unknown, taking risks, and believing in the possibility of happiness. As I put the finishing touches on a new painting, a vibrant depiction of a phoenix rising from the ashes. I smiled, knowing that it represented not just my art but my life. Because I had risen. And I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving.